It happened in broad daylight, a packed auditorium, a microphone on stage, cameras rolling, and then gunshots. Charlie Kirk, one of the most recognizable faces of American conservatism, crumpled to the floor. The crowd screamed. The nation froze. In that single moment, a man who had spent his life igniting debates, stirring controversies, and building movements became something else entirely. A martyr, a symbol, a headline that would split the country in two. But how did we get here? How did a young man who founded a student movement at just 18 years old become such a lightning rod for love and hate that someone believed the only solution was to end his life? Stay with me until the end, because by the time we're done, you'll understand why this killing wasn't random and why the forces behind it might be closer to you than you think. And yes, it leads us all the way to Downing Street. Before the controversy, before the headlines, before the protests and petitions, there was just Charlie. A lanky kid from the suburbs of Illinois with a restless mind and an unshakable sense that he was meant to do something bigger. He didn't go to college. He didn't need to. While his classmates packed up for dorm rooms and frat parties, Charlie was already building his own battlefield. At just 18, he launched Turning Point USA. Not from a boardroom, but from a coffee shop table with a borrowed laptop and a head full of ideas. It was audacious, almost reckless. But that audacity paid off. In a few short years, Turning Point USA exploded into a national force. Their slogans, their campus campaigns, their viral videos all carried the fingerprints of this young firebrand who refused to play by the old rules. He was articulate, camera-ready, fearless, the perfect poster child for a new generation of right-wing activism. But with that meteoric rise came something else: resentment. Professors accused him of poisoning academia. Activists called him a demagogue. Even some conservatives whispered that his style was too sharp, too combative, too dangerous, and Charlie thrived on it. Every insult, every protest, every headline only seemed to make him louder. But what no one knew then was that this was only the opening act, and the next chapter would take him from campus celebrity to national lightning rod. Charlie Kirk wasn't just a commentator. He was a recruiter, a builder of movements. When he spoke, campuses filled. When he toured, arenas sold out. His podcast climbed the charts, pulling in millions of listeners eager to hear the latest volley in America's culture war. And at the center of it all was an unapologetic ideology: pro-faith, pro-America, pro-Israel. He told young people they were the last line of defense against what he called the woke takeover. He railed against gender ideology, condemned COVID mandates, warned about mass immigration, and spoke of global elites plotting to control their lives. Some of his claims were bold, some were exaggerated, some were outright wrong. But here's what made Charlie dangerous. He believed them, with every ounce of conviction he had. And when he believed, his audience believed. He spoke with the cadence of a preacher, the urgency of a man on a mission. To supporters, he was a prophet, calling a generation to stand up and fight. To critics, he was spreading fear and conspiracies that destabilized trust in institutions. And every time he stepped onto a stage, he knew it could end in shouting matches, protests, even riots. But that was part of the draw. Conflict wasn't a side effect of his mission. It was the fuel that kept it burning. And the fire was about to leap far beyond campus walls into the heart of national politics. If Charlie Kirk was good at anything, it was staying in the headlines. Everywhere he went, conflict followed. He faced protests at universities that turned into shouting matches. Activists accused him of giving a platform to extremists. Even within his own movement, there were whispers. Some said he was too radical, others that he wasn't radical enough. But Charlie thrived on controversy. Every viral clip, every late-night debate, every angry tweet poured gasoline on his fire. And the bigger the backlash, the louder he became. Things escalated when he moved beyond campus politics and threw himself into geopolitics. He became one of America's most vocal defenders of Israel, condemning anti-Semitism and standing by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu even as the world criticized Israel's conduct in Gaza. For years, rumors swirled that a large percentage of Turning Point USA's funding came from pro-Israel donors, something his critics weaponized, painting him as a mouthpiece for foreign interests. But in his final months, something shifted. On a viral interview with Patrick Bet-David, Charlie appeared exhausted, even disillusioned. He spoke about the human cost of the war between Israel and Palestine with a new tone, softer, haunted, almost regretful. And then came the shocker. He reportedly rejected a massive donation from Netanyahu himself. For a man who had built his reputation on staunch loyalty to Israel, this was seismic. To some, it was evidence that he had finally seen the truth. To others, it was betrayal. And for the most extreme voices online, it was proof that Charlie Kirk had to be dealt with. By 2025, the threats weren't just trolls hiding behind avatars. They were credible, chilling, and very, very real. And yet, Charlie refused to back down. He kept touring. He kept speaking. What no one knew was that his final event would be his last. The signs were there, flashing red for anyone who cared to look. In the weeks leading up to September, Charlie's security team quietly upgraded their protocols. Threat assessments grew longer. Online chatter darkened. Insiders later admitted they felt an attack was no longer a question of if, but when. And yet, Charlie kept going. Perhaps it was stubbornness. Perhaps it was conviction. Or perhaps it was that something inside him had shifted, and he had one last message he wanted to deliver. By now, whispers about his funding were louder than ever. Critics allege that a large portion of Turning Point USA's backing came from pro-Israel donors. But Charlie was changing. In his final, haunting interview with Patrick Bet-David, he looked tired, almost burdened. He spoke about Gaza not as a battlefield, but as a graveyard. He questioned whether endless war could ever be justified. And then came the decision that stunned his base. He reportedly rejected a massive donation from Netanyahu himself. To some, it was the mark of a man growing independent. To others, it was betrayal, which made what happened next feel less like coincidence and more like grim inevitability. Charlie arrived at Utah Valley University that day to a cheering, packed house. The energy was electric, cameras rolling, phones recording. He spoke with unusual fire, as if he knew this was the speech that would define him. No one knew those words would be his last. Witnesses say the first shot silenced the room. The second sent people diving under chairs. Charlie went down. Security tackled a man, later identified as George Zinn, a suspected pedophile with multiple prior arrests. At first, everyone thought he was the shooter, but Zinn later claimed he only rushed the stage to give the real gunman time to escape. Hours later, police identified the actual shooter as Tyler Robinson, who said he killed Charlie Kirk to stop him from spreading hate. By the time Charlie's body arrived at the hospital, it was too late. And in that instant, the man who had made a career out of speaking loudly became part of a story much bigger than himself, one where the motives were as twisted as the crime itself. The reaction was immediate. Conservatives called it an act of political terror. Progressives debated what his death meant for the movement he built. World leaders weighed in. Donald Trump called for national mourning. Benjamin Netanyahu called him a steadfast friend of Israel. And yet, amid the tributes, there was no shortage of vitriol online. His death didn't unite America. It split it even further. The question that lingered, was this just one man's act of rage or a symptom of something darker growing across the country? Charlie Kirk's assassination wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a disturbing pattern that is becoming America's new normal. Political violence is rising, from synagogue shootings to church massacres. From attacks on congressmen to mobs threatening judges, the line between angry tweets and spilled blood has all but vanished. Charlie himself had warned about this for years. He predicted the nation was on a collision course with itself, that culture wars would eventually turn into real wars. And yet, there was a bitter irony in the way he died. Charlie was a fierce defender of the Second Amendment, a vocal opponent of most gun control measures. He argued passionately that more good people with guns would mean fewer tragedies. But on that September night, it was a gun, not a debate, not an argument, that silenced him forever. Even more haunting was the detail that the shooter was a white man. For years, Charlie had focused much of his rhetoric on black-on-black crime, often warning about violence in inner cities. And yet, the man who ended his life looked more like the very audience he was trying to save America for. To add to the horror, just hours after Charlie was killed, a separate tragedy unfolded. A white gunman walked into an elementary school in another state and murdered children. It was as if the nation itself was screaming that the violence Charlie warned about was already here, and no one was safe. Investigators are still piecing together the gunman's motives. Early reports suggest political radicalization, anger over Charlie's views on Israel, and rage against what he symbolized, a confident, unapologetic conservatism. In other words, Charlie Kirk wasn't killed just as a man. He was killed as a symbol. And symbols are powerful. They live on long after the person is gone. But that raises a chilling possibility. If silencing Charlie was meant to stop his ideas, did it actually make them louder? Turning Point USA vows to continue his work. Conservative activists say they will double down. But without Charlie's voice, will the movement fracture? Will others rise to take his place? Or will his death ignite something far bigger, something no one can control? This is the part of the story no one knows yet, and it's the part that might determine the future of American politics. Charlie Kirk lived loud and died louder. To some, he was a hero. To others, a villain. But to history, he is now something far more complicated. A reminder that words have power, that ideas can divide, and that in a nation this fractured, speaking your mind can come at the ultimate cost. If you've stayed with me this far, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this is just one chapter of a much darker story we're telling on this channel. Watch the next video on your screen now, because the history of political assassination isn't over, and the next story might be even more shocking.